Welcome to the Political Frontline. My special guest today is the President of US-Ukraine Business Council, Morgan Williams. Morgan, welcome to the Political Frontline.
Thank you. It's a very good opportunity to be back with you.
Thanks. Morgan, Ukraine's road toward prosperity needs a new approach with support both from Ukraine business and the international community. But some say that Ukraine has some issues. Thus, the war is the real issue that prevents foreign investors to invest in Ukraine.
Of course, the Putin risk, the Putin conflict, as we call it, does have a major impact upon international business and international investors. Because when you talk about the macro risk here, you talk about business risk, and then you throw in Putin risk, where he has a major program not just to take part of Ukraine, but to destabilize Ukraine, keep things mixed up here, keep things difficult. It does cause problems for the business community.
Do you agree with the statement that investors are waiting for transparency, reforms and stable economy, but not the end of the war?
The investors, have to consider all of those risks, but in terms of other risks besides Putin risk, yes, they want to see Ukraine restructure their debt. They're pleased that the IMF program is in place, so they want some macroeconomic stability. They also would like to see a lot more reforms and reduction of corruption, much deeper reforms, much more quicker and much more effective reforms. Then, of course, they would like to see some stabilization in terms of the overall country risk. But Ukraine could do a lot to help themselves, much more than they're now doing.
As you have mentioned about the reforms, while Ukraine has a serious problem, 97% of Ukraine territory is free to move on reforms. Many foreign investors surprised why the reforms are moving too slow. On this, is this a normal practice during the war, or this is just a small issue?
Well, as far as the international business community and investors are concerned, many of them don't understand that 97% of Ukraine is not in a conflict zone. They don't understand that there's really a lot of stability here in spite of what's going on in eastern Ukraine. And so they delay coming here, they delay trips. We think that's very unfortunate. The image here that they get of Ukraine is not what the reality is. So there's no problem about traveling here. There's no problem here about them working on to expand their business. And of course, they'd like to see more reforms. We think one of the major problems is all of the restrictions that they have from the National Bank on business here, both from a permanent point of view and also from a temporary point of view. It's very difficult to expand your business here under the rules and regulations of the National Bank to regulate private business. They could also do a lot to reform their own Exim Bank. So Ukraine could do a lot to stimulate the business economy. The businesses here want to expand. They want to grow. They want to hire more employees. They'd like to see some help and partnership from the government.
Do you support the policy of the National Bank of Ukraine or not?
I support the policy of the National Bank to stabilize the people's money, to protect the value of the people's money, the currency. I support their program to regulate and stabilize the banking system and get a lot of the corruption out of the banking system. What concerns me is their over-regulation of private business and financial transactions, trade transactions, business transactions, the flow of money. You really can't have a cashless society in Ukraine because of the rules and regulations. So Ukraine is falling far behind in terms of the modern electronic transfer of funds and payments that they have in many other countries. So this is increasing the cost of doing business in Ukraine. It's making it more bureaucratic. It's making it difficult, and it's putting them at a disadvantage with their competitors.
What should the government do to change all this? For example, this payment system, as you have mentioned.
Well, the government needs to devise a very quick and effective program to, one, get the National Bank out of the business of still having Soviet-era restrictions on business transactions. They need to bring more macro stability so the National Bank can cut back on their currency restrictions. And they need to change some laws and rules so that, like MasterCard and Visa and all of your modern payment techniques can work here. They're all, they only work maybe 50% in Ukraine compared to what they should, and Ukraine's falling behind the rest of the world in the whole system of payments and transactions and financial dealings.
What, as you have mentioned about the reforms, we continue on reforms, what does business expect from these reforms?
Business has been...
Especially U.S. business.
Well, U.S. business, international business, expected massive reforms, major reductions in the number of employees in the government, major reduction in restrictions and licenses and paperwork and stamps and all that type of thing, and a major reduction in all of the restrictions that control business. This is not happening. It has not happened. It's I don't know exactly why. The government promised to do some massive and quick reforms here. They haven't done that.
I heard that some U.S. companies are leaving the Ukraine, especially such giants as the Chevron. What are the reasons?
Well, we've had difficulty for over 20-some years in terms of international or U.S. energy companies working here. The energy business has been closed. It's been very corrupt. It's not been possible for international companies to work here. We were very pleased when the government announced that they would move forward on some shale gas contracts and also a Black Sea contract. So there were two shale gas agreements, one with Shell and one with Chevron, and there was supposed to be a Black Sea agreement with ExxonMobil. Because of Mr. Putin, the ExxonMobil agreement did not take place. And Shell did move forward in eastern Ukraine and was moving very rapidly, but then because of the conflict, some of their transactions had to be put on hold. Chevron, for a variety of reasons here in Ukraine that they weren't pleased with, and because of the international energy industry, decided to withdraw from their project in western Ukraine. We were very disappointed in that. We are very disappointed that there's really not a large number of international energy companies involved in Ukraine.
U.S.-Ukraine Business Council is more than 20 years on the market, on Ukrainian markets. What is the role of U.S.-Ukraine Business Council in attracting U.S. investment, for example?
The role of the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council is to, one, promote Ukraine as a place to do business. United States companies are international companies. They want to expand around the world, and many of them have been here for a long time. And so international U.S. investors here is very natural, and so we try to promote more investment in Ukraine and tell U.S. companies why they should invest here. So we promote Ukraine as a place to do business. Of course, we work to make it an easier and better place to do business, because that's one of the biggest problems. It's not an easy place to do business, and it's not gotten better that much quickly. So then, of course, we try to help individual companies, and we also work with Ukrainian companies that would like to export to the United States. So again, we are to facilitate business and economic development between the two countries.
And successfully?
We think so. We've had a great increase in our membership. There are many U.S. companies involved here for a long time, and most all of them are staying here, and they want to expand, and they will expand if some of the conditions that we've talked about will be improved.
I think that 20 years of service show that it is very successfully.
We think that the international business community and U.S. businesses have been here for a long time. They've made it a great contribution to the economic development of Ukraine. They see Ukraine as a large future market, and they want to stay here and they want to help develop Ukraine. It's a good place to do business. The future is good. Just need more business support from the government and try to reduce Putin risk.
Now we will have a short break and then we will continue our program. My special guest today is the president of the US-Ukraine Business Council, Morgan Williams. Morgan, let's continue our program.
Good.
Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko is not happy with the achievements of his year-long presidency. He says the country will stick on the Minsk II peace agreement and stay on the path of the European Union integration, despite a possible full-scale invasion by Russia in the eastern Donbass. What do you think about the Kyiv Post statement that the Minsk is dead? If so, what then?
Well, the Minsk Agreement was an agreement that many people thought was good, even though the United States basically was left out of that agreement. That is, of course, a political agreement, and business, of course, would rather that the Russian forces and the Russian people, terrorists would leave Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They would like to protect the territory of Ukraine, but at the least they'd like to stop the major conflict. So business is not very pleased or happy that someone would say the Minsk Agreement is dead. But so they focus mainly on their own business and how to survive under the present conditions, and they leave the Minsk Agreement to the politicians.
But as I know, that many of Ukrainian companies or international companies are working in this, occupied territory. For example, Metro, Iatsyshyn, and so on. Does there any U.S. companies that's working on the occupied territories?
Most of the U.S. companies that I know are not doing business in the occupied area. If they were, they've withdrawn because there's been an anti-American, of course, emphasis. Mm. Their stores were taken, their warehouses, their retail outlets, their distribution networks. As far as I know, most of them are not operating in that area at the present time.
The president says that fighting corruption, privatization and de-oligarchization troubles him the most. If you were the president of Ukraine, what would you do in these spheres?
If I was the president of Ukraine, one, I would substantially increase the privatization of government assets. They need to stop just talking about this, and they need to do it. Even though it's not a good time to sell assets, these assets are not performing. They are areas of corruption. They need to be privatized. There's many areas under the control of the agrarian minister, the energy minister, and many others. They should be privatized now, regardless of the business conditions. In the long run, this will be good for Ukraine. It is important that the oligarchs, you have to deal with them, and they have a lot of business here, and of course they have a lot of employees. But they should not be taking advantage of the system any longer. They should not be allowed to have huge corruption schemes, and they should not be allowed to abuse the banking system. So there ought to be more controls on some of the business operations to reduce corruption in those areas. Now, in terms of massive reforms, he should issue more orders to reduce the size of the government, to reduce the number of bureaucrats, and actually reduce and reorganize the government. The government needs to be reorganized. It's not effective, it's not efficient, you can't do that slowly. You need to do that quickly and in a dramatic way.
What is your opinion on foreigners in the government of Ukraine? I mean, participation of the foreigners in the government of Ukraine?
I have no objection to that. I have no objections to international experts of all levels being here. This is an international world. This is a world connected one country to the other. No country has all the expertise they need. And here, yes, a lot of international expertise is needed, a lot of new thinking, and people who have been effective in their business or effective in another country. They should be welcome here, and I'm very pleased that some of them have been. And Ukraine should use all of the talent and techniques and abilities they can find, regardless of where those abilities come from, to bring about a better business environment and a better political, economic government system here in Ukraine.
As you have mentioned about the business, if you are the president of Ukraine, what would you change in the business?
Well, I just do all those kinds of things that makes it a lot easier to do business. It's just very difficult to do business here. You have endless licenses, endless opportunities for corruption, endless restrictions on doing business, endless restrictions on the seed varieties you can bring in, restrictions on how you develop new seed plants, restrictions on the movement of grain, restrictions on this, restrictions on that. Every time you turn around, there's another blockage. There's another.
All this restriction must be cancelled.
Most of them are just useless. It's over control. They've got to free up business. They got to let it do what it does, and quit. Take the chains off. Get it out of the Soviet system. Let business perform.
Do you expect many reforms from this government or not? Do you think that this government can change all what you have mentioned now?
Well, I think
I think
the government needs to step back and, like the president has said, take a look at what they've done. And most everybody will say that it's not been effective enough yet. So they need to rethink about how they're going to move forward and how they're going to make more happen in the future. So there needs to be some reorganization. Many people think there needs to be kind of one person in charge of reform across the government levels. Many times in the United States we have a problem. The president appoints like an energy, we call it czar, energy czar or Ebola's czar or whatever, who has the power to try to move the government forward. Here it's in the various ministries, it's in the presidential administration. They need to focus and come up with a program and put somebody in charge of a government-wide reform program. Somebody who's very skilled, very capable, very well connected, and who has the power from the president and the prime minister to cut across all the bureaucracy and implement real reform.
So as I understand, if you want to change the system, you should lead it.
You should what?
Lead it.
Oh yeah, oh absolutely. And you've got to give people, capable people, the power to make the reforms, and not people who are hesitant, or somebody blocks them, or there's 89 people in charge of reform and nobody then is in charge of reform. There needs to be a new emphasis, a new spirit, a new focus on reform.
The United States needs to take new steps to respond to the Ukraine conflict because economic sanctions and other Western actions have failed to get Russian President Vladimir Putin to reverse course. This words was said by the Defense Secretary Ash Carter. He said it on Friday. What did he meant?
Well, the United States Congress is very focused on Ukraine, and they are implementing new programs that should be implemented in Ukraine. There's a whole level of high-level people coming from United States, Ukraine. Of course, our ambassador to the United Nations is going to be here later this week. President Obama, of course, was in Europe just recently, working to keep European sanctions on Ukraine. They've threatened to put some more sanctions on Ukraine. So the U.S. government, I think, is being very firm, and they're thinking about more things that they can do in the future if Mr. Putin doesn't back off.
Jay, G7 summit. US President Barack Obama said before the start of the Group of Seven summit in the Bavarian Alps that leaders would discuss how to stand up to Russia's aggression in Ukraine. What is your opinion? How the G7 leaders must to stand up to Russia's aggression?
Well, I think there needs to be a new agreement between the United States and Europe about how to handle Mr. Putin, because they need to understand that he's not just having a massive program against Ukraine. He has a massive program against Europe, the United States, and Ukraine. The focus just happens to be on Ukraine. He wants to destabilize Europe, and one way to do it, of course, is to say, Europe, nobody else should go into the European Union. Nobody else should be into NATO. You need to back off of your reforms. So he has a massive boots on the ground program, propaganda program, economic destabilization program, and he's trying to weaken the political will of Europe to stay focused on Ukraine, not get tired and have Ukraine fatigue. So it's very important that the United States and Europe keep focused on Ukraine. Do not get tired. Do not say we're just going to make some settlement with Mr. Putin and hope he goes away, because they misunderstand who Mr. Putin is and what he wants. He wants massive destabilization. He wants to destroy the unity of the United States and Europe to fight for an independent Ukraine.
Everybody wants to rule the world.
Well, hopefully not on the way Mr. Putin wants to rule the world.
As you have mentioned about the Barack Obama and the European sanctions, European Union's President Donald Tusk said that the European Union sanctions against Russia might be extended in reaction to the renewed offensive by the Kremlin's backed separatists in eastern Ukraine. Do you believe that extended sanctions will stop Russia?
The business community is very interested in stabilization.
Destabilization or stabilization?
The business community wants stabilization.
Stabilization.
They want to expand here. They want Ukraine to be successful. So the business community supports the politicians of the world to do what's necessary to bring Mr. Putin under control, to get him to back off, and to stop his massive program against Ukraine and other parts of the world. So the business community, most of them would like to see sanctions stay on. They'd like to see maybe some other things implemented. Many business people would like to see the United States provide some more defensive weapons to Ukraine. They think that you're going to have to, Mr. Putin believes in power. He only responds to power. You're going to have to do everything you can to get him to back off so that we can expand and grow Ukraine.
Morgan, and the last question, because we have no more time. The question concerning US. Does the America ready for the Iron Lady in 2016?
We have a very interesting political process. It goes on for a long time. Of course, the campaign has already started, and there's a very large Republican field, and the Democrat field is rather small, but it's very hard to predict. We've had a lot of predictions in the United States about who would be the next president. It turned out to be wrong. So we just have to see how that plays out. And of course, in the United States, whoever is elected president, we want them to be successful. We try to pull behind whoever is the president, because they represent then for 4 years and maybe for 8 years the future of the United States at home, but also around the world. So we let the people of the United States decide who will be president. We try to support the president, and we want our president to be very successful for us and for the rest of the world.
I'm positive that the Ukraine Business Society and the Ukraine government are very grateful for the contribution that US-Ukraine Business Council makes. And especially they are very grateful to the great friends and the Right Honorable President of the USUBC, Morgan Williams.
Well, thank you very much. I've been working in Ukraine now for over 20 years for economic development. We thought we'd be further along than we are now, but we still are very committed to the future of Ukraine as a strong, independent, prosperous nation. The international business community and the U.S. business community has done a lot here the last 18 months to support Ukraine, and they plan to continue to do that.
I would like to finish this program by the words that was said by the Margaret Thatcher. There are those who would say us hold back. There are those who would make us retreat. But we shall never give in to them. We shall never waver, not for a second, in our determination to see this country prosper once again. So on that positive note, Morgan Williams, thanks for being on Political Frontline.
Thank you very much.